Hi, everybody. How you doing? My name is Joel Vardy, and welcome to this workshop. We're going to be exploring layout composition with Headless CMS and Next.js. Now, the way this is going to work is I've pre-recorded this because I can't be available for the actual workshop. Members of my team are standing by on the chat. I think we have Dakota and Kevin from the team on there. Those, so those kind of questions that you have either during while I'm speaking, which is going to be about 40, 45 minutes, sort of taking you through all the stuff that's in this workshop. They'll be there to answer any of those questions for you. And then as you go through and work through it yourself, they can help you on the way with all of that stuff and work all the way through it. So what we're going to be doing today is, let's just go through, I've got a little handy dandy checklist here. We're going to be talking a lot about Headless CMS. And the real kind of thing here is how we can use Headless CMS to build components in a Next.js app that is enabling the content editors in the CMS to essentially assemble pages really easily. We're going to show how all of that works. We're going to use Next.js 13.5, I should say, which is on top of React 18, and it uses React server components. And we'll see the difference between server components and client components. It's built on top of Tailwind CSS. Hope you don't mind. People have love-hate relationship with that. We're going to go through initial setup, setting up like a trial site so we can have an example of CMS in there. We're going to take a tour of that, go through the code, and we're actually going to create a new component. So no wasted time. Hopefully you can sort of really connect with this content. Happy to answer any of your questions. This is my page here on the workshop. I'm not sure if there's ability to connect with me, but you can shoot me stuff on at Joel Vardy at Twitter. Or X, I guess we call it now. Happy to answer any questions or connect with anyone out there that's watching this and has responses. So let's dive into it. Just a little bit of sort of tech talk about Headless CMS. So typically Headless CMS, when we think of it, there's a disconnect. So it's disconnected, the content's not part of the website. So the JSON content is going to come from the CMS to the website. And that JSON is essentially, almost always, some kind of structured content, okay? And a lot of Headless CMS, I think that the sort of misconception is that's the way that structured content is like basically fields, fields of content. You can have content that's in lists and there's some sort of relationship between them, but that's pretty much it. There's no way to easily control sort of important website type things. And what are those website type things that are important? Things like routing, how do I build my pages, and how do I actually get content into my components. So today we're actually going to be talking about a CMS called Agility CMS. Full disclosure, I am CTO of Agility CMS. And Agility, like all Headless CMSs, has structured content. And that is sort of the primary use of using Agility. But Agility also has routes in the form of something called sitemaps. And it has layouts, which is essentially it's an object that sits at a particular route on the sitemap and has a bunch of components that are in it, right? And so it also has the idea of a component. And it's not a component in terms of like a React component. It's the content that something like a React component needs to render. And allowing your content editors to actually compose these routes that have layouts with components on them means that you can build those components one time and those content editors can now reuse those however they want to. And first of all, they can't break your design system because you're just giving them content, but it enables them to essentially build all the pages that they have in their website without you as a developer, needing to be involved. So let's dive into how that actually works. The first thing we're going to do is kind of set up the environment here that we have. So the initial setup, we're going to create a starter, a free starter with Agility. So you're going to go to agilitycms.com. And as I'm going through here, any URLs that you need, we'll just get the team to throw those in the chat if you don't want to type them out. So agilitycms.com, going to go to resources and starters, and we're going to use the Next.js starter, right? And then just click on start free project from there. And that's going to take you to the sign up page, enter a few details. If you actually already have an Agility account for whatever reason, you can just click sign in, but otherwise fill out the stuff and it'll come through. I've already done that. So I've actually gone through that, and hopefully that works fine for you. You type in whatever you want for the name of your project and jump in, and you should get to this screen once you're done, okay? So that'll create your project for you, and now we're actually in Agility. I'm going to take you on a quick tour of what's here so that you can kind of see what's there. So the first thing we're going to do is understand that, remember, there's a disconnect. So we've created the headless CMS part of our whole solution, but we actually haven't created a website yet. But Agility with this starter gives you the ability to do that using some great technology from Vercel. So we're going to click on settings. We're going to go to sitemaps. And what we're going to do is this starter actually has a bunch of content in there by default. And then there is a default sitemap called the website. And we're going to actually deploy that onto Vercel. And this starter is hooked up to an example Git project in GitHub. So we're going to actually, this will clone that as part of this, okay? So you're going to need a GitHub account. And if you don't have a Vercel account, it'll create that for you on the fly, okay? We're just going to click set up a deployment. And we're going to do an automated deployment to Vercel. Now, this project is using Next.js 13.5, which unfortunately on Netlify doesn't quite work. So if you want to use Netlify, you'd have to update the code and actually downgrade the instance to 13.4. But we wanted to use the latest and greatest because a lot of bug fixes are in there for Next.js, and Netlify will have that sorted out really soon. You can also do a custom deployment if you want to deploy somewhere else and just run it yourself on any sort of maybe Azure or AWS, or just run it locally. You can do whatever you want. But this automated deployment with Vercel is really cool because it will not only deploy it on Vercel, but also set all the environment variables for us, and it'll do that all lickety split. So I already have a Vercel account, so it flipped me over to this page. It's going to let me create a Git repo. So you can use GitHub, GitLab, or Bitbucket. I actually haven't tested with these two. GitHub definitely works fine. We're going to call this the Web Unleashed Workshop. Okay. I'm going to do this as a public Git repo. So if you actually want to jump into my GitHub code and look at this, you can do that. Here we go. We're going to click create on that. So what that's going to do is clone the example Git code that we had with that starter and create a Git repo in my GitHub account. And now we're going to click on add integration. And all this is going to do is pop up a window. You really don't get much UI for this. Don't worry about it. What this is doing is allowing Agility to go ahead and set environment variables. You may get an authentication window there. I'm not really sure, but it should just basically come up and then go away. And then what it's going to do now is Vercel is going to go ahead, use those environment variables, and build the first version of this website. So when this is done, we should be able to actually preview what we're doing inside Agility and the website itself that we've just deployed, this starter site. And it is like a very, very basic site with, I think it's got 4 or 5 pages on the sitemap. We're going to refer to pages as layouts in Agility because Headless CMS doesn't typically have pages, so we call them layouts because the idea is we're allowing editors to lay out components on a sitemap, essentially. So this build takes about 1 minute. It's really fast. Next.js 13.5. If you've worked with Next.js before, the builds are a lot faster. It works slightly differently. We're using what's called the app router, which is a new way of kind of putting together projects, which use a React server component. So we'll dig into how that works. But the long and short of it is it means that it builds a lot faster and it runs slightly differently. And here you go. So we're all good. Into it. Okay, so we're here in the settings and we've set up this URL. I'm actually just going to click on here to make sure that it actually deployed okay. So this is our starter site. And you can see we've got this kind of preview bar up here, which we put in on the starter just to make it easier to kind of see what's going on. You can see I'm viewing published content. This does have the ability to view preview mode. Probably wouldn't put in hey, view my site in preview mode switcher on a production site. So there's a few things in here that are just set up for the starter, but this is a good boilerplate for a Next.js 13 project with Agility to get started. So we can see we've got a component here, we've got the header, some navigation, another component here, some stuff in the footer. We'll click into the blog, and we've got sort of a featured blog post that's there. We're going to list some blog posts. I will tell you this site only has 3 blog posts in it, and then we actually just on here just to show like an infinite scroll. I'll show you how that actually works, but you just keep scrolling and it will just keep loading the same 3 ones over and over again. So there we go, there's that. And then we can click into every one of these and we actually see the blog details. And then we've got a little about page with just some rich text that's on there as well. So pretty basic site, essentially 4 pages that's on there. Let's dig into what the actual content looks like in Agility. So the first thing we're going to do is we'll start at the top and look at the content area. The content area here is really basic. It doesn't have a whole lot going on. It's got some categories that are set up. We've got 2 categories for our blog posts, travel tips and travel guide. Create more if you want. So this is essentially what we call a list container. So it's containing a list of items, and you got some sidebar stuff over here that might have been collapsed for you. So we can click over to here. We can see, you can have comments, and it'll show you, if anyone's been commenting on this. But you can also see the properties for this content list. And then if we click into an item, this is very basic. It has one field, but each item has the ability to be saved and published. So it's a typical headless CMS from that point of view, from the content point of view. So this is structured content, and each content has a model, and we can look at the model by clicking here, and we can see that this model's been set up with one field in it, okay? Super basic. Now, the blog post itself, a little bit more complex. So let's look at those blog posts. And you see we've got, remember I said there's 3 blog posts in here. So this is the list. Let's click into one, and you can see there's a bit more going on now. We've got our title, we've got the slug for the URL, we've got a date field, that category dropdown. So this is linked to this list, right? So we can actually create links between content. We've got an attachment here. This is that image. We'll show how to render this really nicely in Next.js, and we've got the blog content, which is rich text at the bottom. Pretty basic setup. Again, all of that's over here. You can change all this, but remember, if you make changes in the headless CMS, those changes won't come through to your code, to the website, unless you actually update some code. So we're not going to make changes to any of this stuff just yet. We've also got another piece of content here, and it's just a single item. It doesn't have a list, so we can set up a piece of content just to render. There's only ever going to be one of it, and this is our header. So this is the starter site. So the alt text of the logo is going to be starter site, and we've got this little logo, which is like a mini camper here. It's like a travel blog idea, was the idea. And the site name is called My Starter Site. So we'll see how we're pulling this content in. But how do I do the routing? Where is my sitemap and all that sort of stuff? To see the routing, we're going to click into layouts. And first thing you're going to see here is there's a sitemap that loads called website. And it's expandable. So let's expand that, and it'll show us all the routes that are on here, all of these layouts. And the homepage is the first one. And so this is using what's called a layout model to determine where are the zones where we can put components. And typically you only need like one zone, a place for people to essentially put components in. If you have a really complex layout, you might have more. But for this one, we only have one zone. And you can see this layout model is using a layout model called main template. I probably should have called it main model, but we digress. And we've got 2 components that are in this zone already, one called text block with image, and the same one there again. Let's open that up. So this is very similar to what we saw with the blog post. It's got some fields in it. It's really just a piece of content with some fields that are meant to render in a component, right? So we've got, tagline, title, an image with an alt text. We've got the image position. Let's jump back to here for a second. Let's look at this homepage. So there's the tagline, title, content, a CTA, an image, and then we render the very same model with different content in it, and then we've just swap out the image position, okay? So we've got image position right, and we've got a primary button, call to action type thing, and some content that's here, and we can say whether this is high priority, which is, and all of this is just content that we're going to use in the Next.js site to render, okay? So I'm not going to go into this one, but this one just is almost the same kind of stuff, but the image is flipped and the high priority is off. And then we've got another page here called blog, and so you can see we've got our heading, which is like, we've got a heading. So we're going to output, an H1 tag, very basic. We've got a featured post here, which allows us to pick one of our blog posts, which is kind of cool. So that's how we had on the blog page. So we've got this featured blog post component, and then we've got the blog listing component that shows down below after that. All right. And then we've got this special layout here that looks like a little circle, and it's a dynamic layout. And so this is where we're going to essentially say for every item in the blog post list, write a page so that we can have a link from each of our blog posts here. We can actually open that. So this page is now represented by, you can see the slug that's there. What's really cool about that is you could build any list over in the content area, and then essentially build a dynamic layout based on that list, which is really cool. So if I click on here now, I can say, we're actually going to build the page title formula from the field that was in here. Okay, let's expand this a little bit. So the page path is going to be built from the slug, which is how we got this page path. So all of the items that are in this list are essentially on my sitemap now. Okay, Pretty cool. And then we've got a component to render the post details, right? And all of this content is actually coming from that blog post itself. And then we've got the About page, which has a rich text area, which is our handy dandy tiny MCE editor here, which allows us to do a lot of stuff. It's both great and powerful and somewhat terrible if you didn't want your users to use it. So maybe you don't want to empower your users with an HTML editor that can do whatever you want. But in this case, it's really nice for us to have that power if we wanted to. Okay, so this is a very basic site. There's a lot more that you can do with these sites, but with limited time, just wanted to give a high-level overview of what the CMS actually looks like. Okay, we're going to go back in a minute once we've seen the code and actually create a new component. So that'll give us a little more time with this. But until then, I wanted to actually jump into Vercel for a second to see what happened there. So we're going to jump back to Vercel. All right, so this is on my account here, and you can see I have lots of projects that I've had in Vercel, but this one's called Web Unleashed Workshop, and it's got the it's got the agility integration already in there, which is cool, and it shows me a bunch of stuff about my site, but it also has a link to my Git repo. So I could have gone to GitHub as well to look at this. So let's look at the Git repo that we've got. So by the way, if you wanted to go and look at this as the public repo, you can look at mine. But essentially, if you've been following along, you should have this in your Git repo, and you can clone this code. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and clone this code locally here. All right, so I'm going to call git clone, paste that in. I'm going to pull that down, and I'm going to cd into that. All right, and I'm going to open my other window. So now I've got this open in Visual Studio Code. I'm assuming that you have Visual Studio Code as a web developer. If you don't, go get that now and download it, and hopefully the folks, you can catch up as you go along. I'm going to go fairly fast because this is pretty basic stuff, but the assumption is that you have Visual Studio Code. We're going to be running this on Node 18. This project uses Yarn. You can use NPM or PNPM if you wish. Those are just the general tools. If you're not familiar with those tools, that's okay. Don't freak out. I can tell you, I've been a developer for like 20 some odd years. I just learned, I remember like it was maybe 2018, 2019 when I just learned about some of those tools. They've changed a lot since then. They change all the time. Wherever you're coming at this from, if you're a new developer, that's cool. That's okay. You can figure it out. And we'll help you figure it out because this is really awesome stuff to get in on the ground floor of. The stuff is evolving really, really quickly. So even if you're a really experienced Next.js developer, and you haven't seen the app router yet, this is going to look a little different than it normally would because we have no pages folder, right? We have no pages folder. We have an app folder, and that's where all the magic starts from, okay? Take a quick peek in the package.json for this. So we have a few dependencies that are in here. One of the biggest ones are the dev dependencies. So we have the Agility Next.js SDK, which is in here. Since Next.js 13.5 is pretty new, these are release candidates of these SDKs, but they are production ready. We will probably just flip this version sometime in the next couple of weeks. So these are okay to use. And we have the Agility Content Fetch, which we actually adjusted some of the things in there for Next.js 13.5 to optimize working with some of that content, okay? So a few of the things in here that I just used to kind of build this out and show how it works, but it is using React 18, and we are on Next 13.5.4 apparently, okay? All right, so I'm going to bring up an internal terminal here, which I like to use. You can use an external terminal, that's fine. I'm just going to run yarn. And by default, this thing won't work. I don't have a .m file, so I don't have any of my default local stuff. So what I could do is, these are the values that I need. I could copy and paste those from Vercel, go to settings, environment variables, and copy them from there. That's totally fine. There is a shortcut you can do if you have the Vercel CLI. So Vercel has its own CLI, and I think the command is Vercel link. I'm going to link this, essentially my local project, to the Vercel project. So now there's a link there, and I can run Vercel. It's okay if you don't run this. env full. These are cool. And it actually goes and creates my env.local file, and oh look, it pulled it all down. It gave me a bunch of things that I don't really care about, but I really do care about all of these agility variables. So you need to have the agility GUID, which basically, this GUID I jump back to agility here. It's in your URL. It's right there. These values are also in your settings, by the way. I click settings, API keys. We've got the GUID, which is here, and we've got the API keys for fetch and preview. So we can pull down like the latest version of content. So like draft mode or like what I've been saving, staging mode. I can go get that, or I can get content in like live or production mode, okay? And we need both of those values in here. I need the preview key and the fetch key, right? And the security key. We don't need the API key. I don't really know why I put that in there, but it's not necessary. It's actually just the fetch key again. But we also need the security key, which is a different key that we use for a validating preview mode. So when someone clicks preview from the CMS, that's going to actually create like a unique hash code that validates whether someone is allowed to jump into preview mode. Because remember that we had the little picker at the top. We probably wouldn't put that in a production site. We'll show you how all that works, okay? I'm going to just refer back to my checklist here. So we create our starter. We deploy to Vercel. We're getting the local environment set up. So we need Node 18 at least. You can run Node 20, but I'm running Node 18. Yarn npm or pnpm. The Vercel CLI is nice. We've got that repo cloned, okay? I kind of do this out of order. We already did a tour of the CMS with content models, components, layouts, and sitemaps. We're going to come back to this a little bit. Let's take a tour of the code, though, because that's fun. We've got our env.local file all set up. I showed you that. Let's look at app router and React 18. So there's a folder called app, which is the file structure of a Next.js project is very specific, okay? And you can see it basically there is a file called layout, which basically tells you where, to pull in like the main sort of structure of your site. So this is where this layout is where like I've defined most of what is going on in my site. But then I have a file called page, which essentially in this case, I'm saying, hey, for the homepage of the site, go get the slug page and use that one instead, because I don't want to duplicate it in my code. So there's really only one page in this site. So we have our root, layout, and page that you have to have. But then we have another folder for every other page in our site. And since all of our pages are being pulled from Agility's sitemap, it uses this special slug format. So we've got ... slug inside square brackets, all right? Which is a general, it's like a wildcard placeholder. And inside that folder, we've got a page file. So that's where we're going to actually load the data from our page. We're going to pull that from Agility. We have a not found. So if there's like a 404 page, we have a loading page, which is really nice. So that's like a React 18 suspense thing that it just does for us. So that if it's going and getting data on the server in a React server component, it will show this loading component while that's happening. And our loading component is like, we've got a loading widget, super basic. And we also wait 500 milliseconds so you don't see this flash of everything, which is kind of nice. And we've got an error page. So we've got an error page that's kind of nice to show, hey, something went wrong, okay? The 404 and the error page are very similar. The magic is happening mostly in this page, by the way. And also, so by the way, you could have this layout, you could have another layout in here. So you can have nested layouts. We don't have nested layouts there because I wanted to keep things fairly simple, okay? Most of the work that's being done here is in the main component itself. And notice this component is async. A lot of these components are either async or not. So that means an async component doesn't have to be async, but it's a server component. So it's going to run on our server. When we do console.logs, we're going to see them in our the Next.js console in our terminal, and we're not going to see that in our browser, right? So this is where we're getting our page. We've got some params that come in here. This is essentially our path that comes in. And what we're going to do is we're going to call just a method that I wrote here, which is inside our lib called getAgilityPage. We pass the params in, and it goes and gets that data, right? I'm not going to dig too deep into that. Feel free to go through the lib, but I've put everything under like the CMS content folder here. It goes and does like most of our server side stuff. We don't have a page here. If it's a bad URL, return a not found. Otherwise, we're kind of going to get that page template. We're going to figure out which sort of layout model we're using. I should have called this layout model. And then I'm going to use, if we have that, I'm actually going to render this component. So the model for each layout here has a template. So we can see that under our components folder, and we have Agility layouts, and there's only one. It's called main template. Okay. So we have one little accessor there inside this thing, so we can have, because you could have lots of templates. So I've made a little accessor to sort of get a component by name. All right. Going through here, and if we don't have the template, I'm going to show an inline error. I'm going to say no template found for this page. What I've tried to do too is if you're playing around and kind of creating stuff in Agility and you haven't created the code yet, for it to show you that in the layout. So if you do go and create a new layout model, it will render saying, hey, we didn't find that template for that. If you create a new component, it'll actually show some default values for that, which we'll show later as well. So what happens is inside this page template or layout component, we actually have this content zone module. And so this says, hey, this is render that main content zone. And we only have one zone on this layout model. And this get module and components are pretty much the same word. We used to call these modules. Now we call them components. But we have basically an accessor that we need to pass into here. And this tells the content zone component, which is coming from our SDK, how to find any of those other components, okay? So you can see here, this get component has this, we have a dictionary of all the components in the site. So the member text block with image, heading, featured post, all those different things. This is basically shows it how to find that by name with a dictionary. And then, so if we have it in there, we just, search case insensitive and return that. Otherwise, we use the no component found component, which is nice because it sort of digs into and it just shows you, what the fields are that you need to actually implement if you're going to build a brand new component. And that only renders in preview or development mode. Okay. Oh boy, lots of stuff going on. I'm assuming that as I'm going through here, there's lots of stuff coming through the chat. Keep those things coming through the chat. My team will keep answering as we go through. Let's look at a couple of those components. Actually, let's run it. So I'm going to run, to install everything, I'm just going to run yarn. So if you use yarn, that's cool. And then I'm going to do yarn dev. So you can also do npm run, npm install, npm run dev, whatever. Same thing, okay? So I'm going to open this up here, and it's going to be localhost 3000. We'll run this thing. It takes a second to load the very first time, but after that, you should be able to just go through the site, and it says previewing latest changes. So when I'm running it locally, it's essentially in development mode, which is also preview mode. So those are two different variables that are in our code that are both true right now. But I can still click through the site. I can view it. It's a little slower because it's loading this. All of the content is being loaded on demand, and there's no caching. And I can click into this thing to view my page. And after I've loaded it once, it does load a lot faster. So it should be pretty responsive for you to kind of work through. It has hot reload and things like that. So if I change some code, I'm going to immediately see it here for the most part. Okay. And you can see there's some terminal stuff coming out here for like when it's loading, it basically tells you when it's loading the data for each page and things like that. All right. Let's look at some of these actual components. One of the components I want to look at first is the text block with image component. Remember, that was in Agility back in our layouts. Let's look at that and see what it looked like. So on the home page, we've got the home layout, I should say, which is going to render on the home page. We've got this, wander the world was the tagline. Okay, so that's here. That's the tagline. Let's go find where this is being rendered in this component. So we've got this text block with image. It is also, even though it's not async, this is a server component, okay? It's going to render on the server, and we're not going to deliver any JavaScript out to the browser for this. We don't need to. So all of this stuff is actually going to run on the server before it all goes out, okay? We're going to generate a link and do some stuff. You can see that this is that's a typed component called module that is going to get an text block with image. So these are all the fields. I've just basically given them strong types to make it easier to work with. I could use an any here, but this makes it a lot easier to work with. So essentially, remember we were working with this other component here called main template. It's using this content zone. So this content zone is going to look at the layout and output all of the components and actually inject to their props this module object that has all of the fields that I need, and these are the types of those fields. So that's kind of happening in the Agility Next.js SDK to make life easier for us, okay? If you wanted to write your own version of this content zone, you could totally do that. This is open source too, so you can actually look at to see what's going on there. It's not a black box, but it's just to make it easier to kind of wire these things up. Okay, so we've got the fields from our module, and then if we dig into our look at some of our code here, we can see that, hey, if we have a primary button, output this link, and then we're going to use, the fields.primarybutton.href, right? So from agility, where was that? So the primary button's right here, and the href is the URL essentially /blog, and the title is this. So there's the href, and probably going to be another link down here as well too. I think we output this link twice because I can click on the picture or I can click on the button to do that. So down below, we've got this. So it's using generate link, and it's using the href, the target, and the .text. Okay. Let's see where we're outputting. Here's the title, the tagline. So if I have a tagline, output the tagline. This is really useful to say, hey, you know what? If this field wasn't required, or if for whatever reason we don't have this field, then don't put that spam there at all. Okay. We're going to output our title, and for all of these, if I was just creating it, if I strongly typed it, right, I get IntelliSense, which makes it a lot easier to work with this stuff. Okay. It's important to understand the relationship between your code and these types. And you can see title and content. This is assuming that those are required fields. See, they're not optional, but the tagline is an optional field. So it might be undefined. My image position, that's a drop-down value with right or left, right? So I've just done this here. Those are the two values that this can possibly have. It makes my life easier. The image field, which is, if we look at agility, here's the image field. We've got this. It's actually a strongly typed image field. So when we're outputting the image, let's look at that. I'm actually passing that entire object into this special component called agility pick, right? There's another component called agility image. You can also use something called next image. Using Next.js to output images is really interesting because it does a lot of work for you, or tries to do a lot of work for you to optimize those images. Pretty much every CMS, including agility, has the ability to serve images from the assets library, which I didn't dig into, but we're going to basically serve those over a CDN. And you can actually serve different versions of that image very easily. And this agility pick just makes that easier. It's essentially a wrapper around the picture component, and we can pass in what's the default size or width of that main image. What's the class name of that? So how do we want to render it in terms of CSS? And then we can pass in a bunch of different values. These are essentially the sources for this, literally a list of sources. And we can use a media selector to say, hey, if the screen width is at least 1280 pixels, output this image at 800 pixels. If it's 640, do 640. If it's 639, do 640. So what that means is that if I actually resize my screen now, so this is bigger than 1280, so I'm, but if it's down to only this size, so less than, 640, then it's going to be rendered like this. So I know how this image is going to render, so I can come up with different strategies for outputting this, okay? Which means I can, if someone's viewing this on their phone, let's actually jump into mobile mode here. I'm gonna view my toolbar and just do if I'm on an iPhone here. So if I don't necessarily want the full size image. So what I could do, this is actually a really useful operation. So this is saying up until 639 pixels, I might want to only say, you know what, I want to go really low. I'm going to do 320 pixels for that. Let's actually look at this. And now I'm going to refresh this page, although I think it hot reloaded. I'm going to inspect this, and you can see we've got, show me the image, because that's the fallback, but I've got these different sources that output. Let's look at the network tab for what this image is, okay? So this is I don't know, it's post GAD, this is whatever. It's a really long file, but let's look at the actual network tab for this to see what actual images are loading. Didn't mean to go into too much detail, but this is really useful to see, all right? So you can see we've got this, it's a WebP, and this is GADRUS, and its width is 600. See that? It's right there. So I don't know if I did my selection right, because it looks like it's doing a fallback for whatever reason to this 600, but it should be rendering with this. So that's what I would dig into. Something's going on there that it's not rendering my source properly. Anyway, these are just typical media queries. So it's not a black box for how this is working, but sometimes you got to kind of dig into what's going on, okay? All right. So that's how that works. I really highly recommend the agility pick to output stuff. You can also use the agility image, which is another component. And I'm actually going to show that right now. So, oh, you know what? I didn't change the right one. That's why. So this is if I don't have a link. So the primary button is optional. If I don't have a link, it does this one. But if I do have a link, it uses that one. So let's change this one to 320, and hopefully that will work if I refresh my page. Hang on. And we're here. I don't think it did work, actually. It's still 600. So I got something going on with my, may have some settings on here that are doing something wrong too. But at any rate, I want to have my fallback be good, because if for whatever reason the browser says, you know what, I can't render one of those sources, it will render your fallback image, which is nice for things like older browsers. And I think it does that for depending on what web crawler is, like a search engine is crawling your site. Okay. All right. I don't know how I got this messed up, but at any rate, this is something that would be something like I spend a lot of time optimizing this to make sure that you get the best version of that image at different screen sizes. And using the responsive tools is a really nice way to kind of do that. You should see different. You can see I got the different travel photos are rendering down here. Oh, you want to know why this is happening? This is high priority. So remember we had set this one here to be priority equals true. That basically says to this image when it renders to not be lazy loading. And because we want to render this image first, because it's our that first contentful paint that we want to get on there. If we turn that off, okay, I'm going to save this, then it will work. Look at me debugging things. Okay, so render this. It might take a second for that to come through, hopefully. It worked. No, it didn't work. Yeah. Oh, there it goes now. Okay, so that new content came through, and now you can see this image is only 3.9K, and it's loading the one that is 230 wide, 230 pixels wide. Actually, I can hardly tell the difference on this, but I just saved like, well, 37 kilobytes on my homepage. So getting this right is absolutely worth the time, okay? And so maybe I didn't want to have the high priority on that, whatever. Works really, really well. It's a nice way of doing it. I just spent too much time on it, so let's move on. All right. Getting back into here. So how does the routing work? We looked at that. Everything routes through the slug. And what happens here is we have this layout composition of components. We looked at that. How does the metadata come through? All right. So the metadata itself, if I look on this page.tsx, so this file is rendering for each route that's on our site. And it has this generate metadata, okay? This is a Next.js specific function, and I've written another function that we call here, or another method called resolve agility metadata, which is in our lib folder. And what I'm going to do here is actually grab my the header content, because that has the name of the site, that has the site name that's in there. I'll collapse a couple of these regions for now. And basically, I'm going to essentially return the metadata, which is essentially a strongly typed metadata object that's going to go in my header for this site. So I'm going to actually compose the title using, I have this sitemap node. So the sitemap that comes from Agility, I actually have that node in my Agility data. All right, I'm going to use the title, and I'm going to use the site name from my header. Okay, so that header object, I basically just called get header content. And if I look at what that's doing, get header content, it actually has strongly typed of what's coming back with the header. And you can see this one, I'm actually using React Cache, which I'm not going to dig into, but that's super useful too. And I'm going to call get the Agility SDK, and then get the content item called site header. I'm only going to need one of those items because it's a single item, and then return that directly. Okay, so that I can use this now from anywhere that I need it to go get Agility data. So that's just general data access stuff that you would write in any JavaScript project or TypeScript project. So now I've got this header content, and I can use it to generate my title. The description is coming from the SEO object that's on the fields. So this layout object, over here we had, go back to the layout itself, we've got this SEO. So I can set the title, I can set meta tags and keywords, all those different things. Those are going to come through in my head tag. And I can set open graph images. So that's super useful. And I have other metadata that I can output there too. So on this one, maybe the user actually manually has some other meta tags. I think it's property equals, and then property and content. You can do that. If someone manually types this stuff in, and a lot of CMS developers are savvy with SEO, they can just put that in there. CMS editors, not necessarily developers, are savvy. So we have this additional meta tags that I render here using a React parser. And then we have open graph stuff. So this is really interesting too, because remember, this is rendering for each page that's going to render in my site. So every single layout that's on here, this resolved metadata is going to work. And if the metadata is a blog post, right, I want the image of that blog post to be the open graph image. So if I have a piece of content on here, I'm going to go get that content item. And if that content item happens to have the definition name of post, so it's a post model, then I'm going to go grab the image from those fields, assume that it's an image field, and then push that into my OG images. And those OG images are going to be used right here. That's pretty cool. And I've kind of said, hey, if you have other dynamic page or layouts that are there, so maybe you have like an events list or something else, you could actually output that to there. So we've got tons of great SEO things that we can do as well. We already looked at images a little bit, so you can use Next Image, look into that. Agility Image is a wrapper around Next Image. So the interesting thing about Next Image is it's a client component. So that actually outputs JavaScript to your browser to do some stuff to decide what image to send out. But Agility Pick is a server component. It does not output any JavaScript at all. And then preview mode. Preview mode is really cool. What we want to be able to do is this is what we want to get to with preview mode. From the CMS, we want someone to be able to come to here and click preview and be able to see their content before they publish it. That's the whole goal. So this is what we want to have working at the end. So you can see here, we've got like this period at the end. So that's only in staging mode on this, right? So if I take away this period and click save, right? And then now this may take a second to update, but that should disappear, okay? Oops, it's gone. But if I switch, we've added a toggle mode to live mode. If I basically exit preview mode, that dot comes back, okay? Because it's only available, I look at the changelog here. If I just compare this with this, you can see that the one thing that's different is that period was removed, okay? So the published version has this dot in it, okay? So that gives the ability for users to be able to preview what they're doing, okay? How do we do that in Next.js? It's a little tricky. What the Next.js SDK for Agility has for you set up is something called handle preview. I just searched for that. I can't remember where I put it. And it could be, basically, you want to put it somewhere where it's going to be running on every single request. So I put it in the header. And then what we do is say handle preview. And then if handle preview returns true, so handle preview is actually coming from the Next.js SDK. If that returns true, then we're going to set a is preview requested state variable in this. This is a client component. So don't put this in a server component, by the way, because it won't work. It needs to be in a client component. And then we can say, hey, if preview is requested, show the loading widget. So you can see when I clicked preview from Agility, it did that loading. That's how this is happening, right? And this handle preview essentially redirects me into preview mode. I actually have to implement that on the site in the API folder under preview. So we've got this preview. So this is what they call a serverless route. Used to be called an API route. Right, so we've got here, now we're basically interpreting the preview key. We're going to validate that key that comes from Agility, and we're going to redirect to the slug. It's really all that it does. And we're going to turn on draft mode. The draft mode is preview mode. Used to be called preview mode prior to Next.js 13, or prior to the app router, I should say. And now they called it draft mode. I don't know why they used a different thing, but that's what they did. So we essentially redirect. Next.js uses 307s instead of 301s. I don't really know why, but they do when we set the location header to redirect it. And that's how preview mode works. We also have to have the ability to exit preview mode. So there's another route that we hit for that, and we just call draft mode.disable and redirect back to a slug, right? That's how that works. I'm not going to dig too much deeper into there, but what I want to do is I want to create another component. I want to show you the power of this. So here's an interesting question. So say I want to create a brand new component. Should I start from the code? Should I do a code first type component, or should I start from the model? And there's no real right answer for that. But you definitely need to start from somewhere. And what I would definitely start with is the requirements. Okay. But a lot of times people will search around the internet and try to find some example code that they can then just sort of rework, which is fine. But you have to understand what are the requirements, because an editor needs to actually work with this. So you need to do a little bit more thinking than just sort of start coding and just plug some stuff into the CMS to kind of make it work for you as a developer. We need to make this work for editors, and there's a real art to that. I call it content architecture, content modeling, but you also have our coding. So there's actually, as a developer, if you're a content architect as well, that's really, really powerful if you can understand what it's like for the user who's working with that content. And hopefully you'll see this in this demonstration. All right. So what is our requirement? I want to have an image carousel with the ability to create a new list of images every time the component is added to a layout in the CMS. So this requirement is very CMS specific, right? I want to allow someone to drop a new carousel on there with a new list of images with essentially a gallery that I can put in there, okay? And each image should also have a caption in addition to the alt text. So it can't just be a raw gallery. It needs to have some additional metadata that's on there, because sometimes carousels have like other text and other things on there. So we're going to use a list of images. We're not actually going to use a gallery field for this. So for the modeling notes, I'm probably going to need a carousel item content model with a caption field and an image attachment. And we're going to need an image carousel component with a nested list of carousel items that's on there. Okay, so that's how we're going to actually code this. I can tell you I kind of cheated, and I've given you some example code that I wrote. And I used, I don't know if you guys have heard of v0.dev. Oops, I typed that wrong. Hang on, we don't need a star. So if you actually go to this URL, which is in the notes, and I'm actually going to share these notes with you, you can see this is the base component that we're going to start with, and it's a client component. This is the example project that I worked with as a tester. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go a little bit code first here. I'm going to copy this into my project. Under components, I just put it under the common folder, new file. I'm going to call this carousel.client.tsx. That is totally my own naming convention that I just came up with to show that this is a client. There are lots of other ones on here that don't have the .client, so I didn't use my naming convention very well, but this is definitely has use client at the top. Okay, and you can see if you actually want to look at what I did here on this one. So this is like v0.dev is pretty darn cool. So it created most of the code for this for me, which I then copied and pasted into here to do what I needed to do. And then I abstracted away some stuff. Okay, so we have this component. Well, I'll come back to that. Right? Let's actually go create the component in Agility though. Okay, so back to our requirements. First one, we needed the modeling notes. Actually, I looked at requirements and I came up with these modeling notes. So we need a carousel item content model first, and that will become evident in a second. So I'm going to go to the modeling section. I'm going to look at content models first. I'm not going to create the component. I'm going to create the linked content that it needs first. Create a new content model called carousel item. And remember, it's going to have a caption that I'll add first. So here I've created a text field on there called caption, right? So fields are the field types here. I just dragged them over. I'm going to make that required. I'm not going to do description in advanced. We'll just do really high level stuff for now. And I also want an image. So there's lots of different field types, but I'm going to scroll down through here. I'm going to use an image field for this. And I'm just going to call it image for now. And to make that required as well. So these things have to have a caption and an image, and that's it. Okay, super basic. We're going to keep it simple, all right? So that's that. By the way, I usually do diagrams for these as well, because it's really nice to have like diagrams with arrows, kind of like database diagrams, but it really, really helps organize these things. But we need an image carousel component. Let's create a new component called image carousel. So we're going to need the component model. Create that, call it image carousel. And then I'm going to essentially add one field onto here, and it's going to be a linked content field that for every time I create one of these carousels, it's going to create me a new list underneath of there. So reference, we call it a reference field. It's a linked content. So I'm going to call this, I'm just going to call it items for now, for lack of a better term. And under the field properties, this is a really complex field. So I'm just going to be super blunt. There's a lot of options here. I'm not going to go through them all, but basically I want to have this be a nested content. So every time I create a new one of these carousel, I want to have a whole new list that gets created. I want to say, hey, use the carousel item model to create that list. I want it to be a list. I don't want a single item of it. And show me an embedded view of that list. Cool. I want to see the caption column. Maybe I want to see, let's see, modified date, modified by, status. That's useful. And then let's sort it by field. And there's a special field called item order. Okay, so I actually should be able to order these up and down. That's a lot of settings. Don't worry about it. If as you're going through this, my team can help you go through this. But let's go through and just add this to the page. This is always what happens, by the way. People do this, okay? This is not a bad thing, but I'm just going to go through and I'm going to add this to the page and we'll see what happens. Okay, so adding it to the home page, dropping that carousel. So by the way, I clicked add component. It shows me the add component thing here and I dragged it in. I probably should be going a little slower, but whatever. This component is currently listed as new, so it won't render at all until I go in and add some stuff into there, right? So I need to actually go in and save this the first time to create that empty list of items. But now if I click new, I can put a caption in here. So I'm just going to call this item 1. And I think I have some images here that I can use. That was just for fun. So I was lucky enough to go to Egypt last year, so that's fun to show images from that. So we have this one. I'm going to do alt text. Just going to put 111. So there's, hey, move the pyramids, fun. Save and close that. So you can see now we've got one item in this list, which should show up in a second. There it is. Let's create another one, item 2. And we'll do another one. Joel riding a camel. That's fun. All right. Really quickly, just throw some in there. You could generate these a different way as well. Let's do one more. Drag and drop that one under there. So I didn't talk about this, but as I drag and drop these in, they're actually going into the asset section automatically. I could browse the asset section to see them as well, to bring all this up, but I'm not going to do that right now because we're running short on time. So this is number 3. Save and close that. Cool. So if I preview this, what should happen? I don't even know. Definitely, I haven't added any code onto Vercel to render this thing yet, right? So what it does is actually there's a special, remember that like component not found component? So that actually tells me, hey, you haven't rendered this component, you haven't written any code yet for this component, okay? It has an items field on there that has a bunch of JSON. So it actually pulled in all of the JSON content that I needed to render this strongly typed content, but it didn't actually render it, right? Like I don't have that there. And that only shows up in latest mode. If I click live mode, if I go out of live mode, it won't render anything, okay? So I won't see an error on my site, but I won't see anything yet. So we have to actually write this code, okay? So let's go ahead and do that. So what we need to do under agility components, I'm super lazy. I'm gonna just copy and paste like the most basic component called rich text area because I can never remember how to do stuff. So this one's basically carousel. It's going to be a module. I can't remember what the type is, so let's just make it, oops, I'm not going to do that. Make it an any type for now. I don't know what the fields are. So I do still have a fields property, but it's going to be an any type. And I'm just going to render, let's get rid of this. I'm just going to render carousel. Okay. Basic React stuff. Okay, so this will actually work. It won't break. So I'm just going to render the word carousel because I just want to kind of get the placeholder in place. All right. In order to tell let's rename this too. Carousel, right? Name the file. So now I need to tell, this is still not going to work, by the way. So let's actually render the local version of this. Hang on. Okay, local. Let's go out of this. Turn on that. Okay, just refresh this thing. And look, it already refreshed. Look, it's not there. Okay, we still haven't found image carousel because I haven't overridden the get module method, right? It doesn't know how to find this yet. And this gets called to basically say, we know the definition name of this, the model name of this component, but we don't know the component to actually render this with React yet, right? But we're going to put this in here. So I'm going to say, hey, if you have a carousel, I have to add the import. Give me a second. Import carousel. Gotta love Copilot. Thank you, Copilot. Jump that into there, and I spelled it wrong. Carousel. So if we see the word carousel, and by the way, that was up here. Oh, sorry, image carousel. Oh, that's going to drive me crazy. Okay, image carousel. Let's just rename all of them because otherwise people will think, what are you doing? Oh my gosh, I spelled this wrong in so many places. Carousel? Oh gee, this is how typos can last forever, but I'm not going to fix it right now. Okay, so we've got carousel. What I really want to do is render this client component here, this carousel client. So what I actually don't want to render this at all. I want to render my carousel dot, what did I call it actually? I think I just called it carousel, my carousel, right? I just want to do that. And I'm going to need, is that the right thing? Oh, I shouldn't have done this. This needs to be called image carousel. Oh, geez. Doing all the bad things here. Okay. Now I've got one called carousel, which is over to there. Cool. It needs an image property, which I don't have yet. So I'm just going to send an empty array into there. And then just for testing, let's just throw some example images in here to see what works. And refresh this thing, and we've got this. Here's our carousel. So it renders with these example images, right? It's not the nicest carousel, by the way. It got generated by AI in like 2 seconds. So, lower your expectations. Okay. All right. So, but what I want to do is see, hey, what am I getting from here? Well, easiest way to do that is I'm going to do the old console.log. Let's just see what the fields look like, okay? Copilot's great, by the way, totally worth it. And remember what I said, console.logs in server components don't come through, they come through here, they do not come through here, okay? Like nothing in the console from that, it also comes through here, right? So I can see this field, we have a thing called items. So we have items that's there, and it's of type, so this is my image carousel item, like that. That's that. Let's just make this an any for now. So this should still work. It's an array. So this comes through as an array. So what it does is it actually expands out that nested list for me, which is really nice, and gives me all of the stuff, and it gives me the actual full-on content items. So I know these are an array of content items, and I need to say, what is the actual field type that's in there? So I'm going to do another interface to strongly type this for this image carousel item. And I'm pretty sure I had a thing in there called image, and it was an image field. And I had a caption, which was a string. Oh my gosh, honestly, how does it know? Caption is a string. Very cool. So I can use generics on here to do that. So this is pretty cool. This is, and if we wanted to look at some of these other ones like post listing, I think it did the same thing, right? The module of featured post content, which has a list of featured posts, right? So you just look around this other code, it'll tell you kind of how to do this stuff. So we have a list of these things. So now what I need to do is basically this. I have my fields. Let's just do this. Fields.items, right, is this array. So what I want to do is let's do this, const images equals, and as soon as you get into a hurry, this doesn't work very well, but we're going to do our best. What we want to do, I can do this right. I actually want to do this as, what does this require? It needs a source alt caption. So our source is going to be, do this, item dot fields dot image. Item dot fields. That should be strongly typed. Content item of dot image fields. So hang on. Item fields dot, here it is. URL. I think that's right. Give me 1 second here. Oh my gosh, I just noticed that I did this wrong. Okay, here we go. This is not, it's a content item that has these fields in it, okay? And now we have fields, that's better. Image dot, okay, I want to do the URL, perfect. And this was going to be item dot fields dot image dot label, perfect. Should work. Oh, we want to have this as a comma. And the caption is going to be item.fields.caption. Perfect. So now I should be able to do this. And we're going to send our content right through. Let's see if that worked. And it didn't because I haven't updated this because I was overriding this just for testing. And there we go. Hey, pretty cool. Now, probably one thing I want to do, if I actually look at this image though, if this image was enormous, it's not, but if it was enormous, that would be a bad thing. And since I know this thing is only asking for 800 by 600, I'm actually going to adjust this a little bit. There's one last thing before we finish up here. I'm going to just adjust this and manually, because I know we can do format equals auto and set the width to be 800 just for fun. And now this image is going to be a lot smaller in terms of its size. Okay, so this actually turns it into a WebP and make sure that it's not too big. Okay, so now we've added that component onto there. Let's get rid of our console.log, so that's all good. All right, so clean up this. Let's refresh this now. Awesome, it's cool. We did it all. But wait, still don't see it on here. What we need to do now is actually check in to our main branch. We've added this into here. So carousel, probably a better comment would be better. And normally you would do a PR to hit to main, but hey, for now, we're not doing that. I think this was actually part of the itinerary too. So we've got it hooked up to the content. We've run it local. We're going to push the code up to the main branch. That should trigger a build on here. So we've got this build that's happening. So the way Vercel works is pretty cool. Netlify is the exact same way. By the way, I like Netlify and Vercel equally. But this build is going to happen as soon as I push to that main branch or close or merge a PR into that main branch. And this is going to do this build for me and actually update automatically and do all this work for me to get it all onto this server that works. So it's ready. If I refresh this now, no blamo. Oh, wait. Oh, I'm not in preview mode. So this is our little hack. We have the ability to actually jump into preview mode, which is faking the agility preview key. Don't put this in a production site. And lo and behold, here we go. So there's our thing. But I jump back to live mode and it's not there. So how do I publish this to get it online? Let's just go ahead and we'll publish these items first from agility. So we're going to publish these 3 content items. Actually, I think I could have just published this layout first. So I'm just going to publish this whole layout, and it should do everything that's on the page, on this layout, I should say. So it's going to publish this. It'll take a second to kind of do some processing because it's going to publish the layout. It's going to publish the image carousel, and if the images that were on that carousel, those items needed to be published, it would publish those as well. So this will take a second to process. We're also running on, this is the Agility's free accounts right now, so it's all throttled. So if it takes a minute for you as well, that's why. Here we go. That took a second to come through. We're going to let that reload. Should be okay. And what's cool about this is I don't need to run a webhook or anything like that to get the updated content into here. The content in this Next.js site, I think I have it at, I can't remember. It's a certain number of seconds before it automatically refreshes. So it's refreshed here. So I'm just going to refresh. It'll take me a second. This is embarrassing. It shouldn't take so long. Did that come through? I think it did. I think we're good. Not sure why it's not updating. Oh, there it goes. Okay, of course, the last time. So it basically got, it gets cached on their CDN and it takes a couple seconds for it to come through. I don't remember what I have the revalidate property set to in my code, but now I've got my new component that's on there. And if I want to create that new component somewhere else, like maybe the about page and say add component, drop an image carousel, I can go ahead and do that there as well. Now this component can essentially be part of a composable layer. All right. I really hope you enjoyed this talk. You got more time, another essentially a couple hours, if you need to go through this again. I know Dakota is running this. Thanks, Dakota. He's got this video of me. So if you need to go back to a particular time and say, what did you say about this? Then you can refer to that. You've got these notes that I've shared with Dakota, and hopefully he can share that with each of you as well. But it's been great talking to everybody. Definitely reach out. I'd like to hear what you thought about all this. Happy to answer any questions. And thanks for watching. Hope to see you again sometime.